Hi, my name is Jenny Conrad, and today we are going to explore the blended learning model, individual rotations, ways to engage students with choice boards, pathways, and playlists. Just so you know, today's Lunch and Learn session has been pre-recorded to honor personal and instructional plans for the Inauguration Day ceremonies. Please feel free to access our resources at dlc.wcpss.net, where you probably found this recording. You can also find our slide presentation there with all of the live links available. And please feel free to reach out to your DLC for further assistance. As we begin today, we're going to start by taking a look at the North Carolina Digital Learning Standards for Students. The two standards that we're going to focus on today are Empowered Learner, where students can choose, achieve, and demonstrate competencies in their goals. So when we think about how that relates to individual rotations, giving students the choice of what their assignment might look like or how they present their work could be an example of the Empowered Learner Standard. And it's also about giving students the opportunity to make the choice that's best for them. The other standard that we will focus on today is the Knowledge Constructor, where students curate information and explore real-world issues. So depending on the type of individual rotation you set up, students have the opportunity to construct a knowledge set with information that you share with them, or to curate information in a way that makes sense to them. So we'll start today with a warm-up. So I would like for you to think of a time when you experienced choice or were able to learn at your own pace. And I'll give you about 30 seconds to consider the following questions. How did it make you feel? Were you more engaged in the learning? Did you create or construct your own representation of learning? So for me, when I think about choice, I think about what it's like to go to a conference and I get to pick which session I go to. I also think about the product that gets created. So I am a fan of spreadsheets, and I tend to create things in spreadsheets more often than in a Google Doc because of some of the organizational features. So I think about those pieces when I'm given some choice. And as we move through today, I want you to think about how students could be more engaged if they have the choice or have some choice or ownership in their learning. There are three parts that make up engagement. The first is the emotional piece of engagement. So do I feel safe? The next is the cognitive part of engagement. Am I interested in the task, the product, or the activity that I'm creating? And that third piece is the behavioral. So am I on task? Am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? So as we go through today, consider these components of engagement that can be addressed and answered through individual rotation. So our session objectives are that we will define individual rotation and explore the different types. We will look at the elements for planning and creation, and then at the end, I'll share some resources and help you find support from your DLCs. So here's our agenda for today. We will start with these four major questions. First, what are individual rotations? What are the elements of an effective individual rotation? How might I use this in my own classroom? And how might I plan for or create individual rotations for students? So you may have seen this image in the 4 courses. They were on the same page with the other blended learning models. So we have flipped instruction, we have station rotation, and today we're going to dive a little bit into individual rotation. We're mainly going to focus on the part of individual rotation that talks about these personalized learning activities through pathways or playlists. And this workshop type model we're going to frame around choice boards today. So giving students the option to choose one type of station or one type of activity over the other as the workshop model. And how this is different than the station rotation is in the station rotation, groups of students move from one rotation to another together. So there is that inherent collaboration feature that can be built in to station rotations as students are doing the same activity. With individual rotation, students get choice to sort of go on their own path or make choices for themselves. It's not that collaboration can't happen with these, but students would have to specifically schedule to work with another student in their own individual rotation. So they may get feedback from another student at some point, or you may plan for their paths to cross in this individual rotation, where students have that choice to go sort of on their own through the activities. So here's sort of a model of what it is. So you have a student, and the student is given a list of curated actions or activities or things that you need them to explore. These can be anything that you curate for the student that helps meet that learning goal. And the purpose here is for students to really dive into what speaks to them, what their learning style is, what they're interested in, what they want to create. So there's some choice here in the path that they might take. There's some choice in the product that they might create. And students can also construct their knowledge in different ways through this list of curated activities. And so that last image is the student choosing which way to go. With the pathways, it may be more directed, but they may have some choice in the product. And we'll dive into what those 3 models and pieces look like today. So here's an example from Rogers Lane. Rogers Lane is an elementary school in the eastern area of the district, and they have been using choice boards, pathways, and playlists for a while now. And the thing that I really want to highlight here is that across all choice boards, pathways, and playlists, you'll notice that they have a variety of experiences. So students get to have different experiences as they progress through these learning models. It is high engagement for students. All 3 of the models maintain that high level of engagement with students, not only cognitively engaging, but also emotionally engaging with the work that they're doing. Multiple intelligences can be involved in this, and in their model, it's involved in all of them, as well as the 4 C's. And all of these start with the standard. So all of these pieces are put together based on the standards that you want students to learn. And then some of these other pieces are optional depending on what type of model you're using. So whether you're using a pre-assessment or check-ins as you go, whether students have choice in the task or even choice in designing the activities. And this image came from an article written about Rogers Lane, and if you would like, you'll notice these little links throughout the presentation. If you click on the link, it will take you to the article so you can dive in a little bit deeper into what they believe about choice boards, pathways, and playlists. So if you think the structure of an individual rotation would fit your learning goals, let's take a minute to dive into the elements that make effective individual rotations. So first off, we're always going to start with the standard aligned content and activities. So we are starting with the standards here, what students need to know and be able to do. The second element that makes it really effective are the clear directions and accessible materials. And I know that being in this way of teaching has really prepared us to share lots of materials and directions with students. This individual rotation also contains opportunities for check-ins and feedback. So where might students either reach out if they need help or they need some guidance, or where might you check in with students to see how they're doing? And then the difference in individual rotations and planning is this organization of materials and resources. So these choice boards, pathways, and playlists really have a way of organizing all of the things that students need and sort of packaging them for students to be able to complete individually. So now we're going to dive into what this looks like in action. So if I were to create a choice board including those elements, what would it look like in action? So this was an example that was shared with us by Dr. Debbie Swift. She is a 6th grade science teacher at Davis Drive Middle School. So the first thing that she tells students is, remember, you already have working knowledge of this. We've taken some notes. You have something to refer back to. And then she gives clear written directions as to what they're supposed to do here. So they have to do what's in red, and then they get to choose 2 more. Not only does she do that, but she also provides a visual of what it should look like when it is complete. And she gives some tips along the way too, of like, move the starburst over the task and do not do this in present mode so that you can see the things that you need to move. So some helpful tips and tricks as well as the what I need you to do. On the next slide, not only has she provided those written directions, but she also provides a video directions for students. So if you're a fan of Brené Brown, she has a saying that she says a lot where she says, clear is kind. And I think that this is a really great example of how to tap into that emotional engagement piece where students feel that they know exactly what they are supposed to be doing. It has been laid out for them and they have a path forward. Not only that, but that helps them to feel safe in moving forward with what they're doing. So you'll notice here is the review choice board. So this one actually has some pathway-like elements because pathways guide students to do certain things in a certain order. This one says you have to try to complete the task in red. So those are the first ones that you have to do. That gives sort of a pathway that for students to start. You'll notice that there are several standards aligned activities here. So they may address the standards in different ways, but they all address something to do with the seasons. But there is some choice here. So if a student wants to watch a video, they may have a choice between logging in and watching a YouTube video where they get to dance or going to Discovery Ed and watching a specific video. You'll notice with the Discovery Ed, she also gives specific examples of how to get to Discovery Ed using that specific link, get to a certain video in Discovery Ed. If a student would rather explain their favorite season, they can do the Flipgrid, and then there's some options for them to read or write here as well. So students really have control over that task, which helps increase that behavioral engagement too, because people are more willing to complete the task when they feel like they have control. And then also, we'll take a look at the slides. So these slides are also in the same slide deck, but they give the student opportunity to receive feedback. So everything is in one spot. The teacher can go back and refer to the slides to grade it, as well as the student can go back and find the information if needed. So it's not in a lot of different places. It has sort of a flow as you go through, so students can easily find all of the information and pieces they need located in this one choice board. So I'm going to pause, and I would like for you to think about the things that we've gone over. So we've covered sort of the elements of effective individual rotations, and we've looked at an example or an exemplar really of a choice board. And I would like for you to take and jot down a 6-word story about what you think is most important moving forward with considering incorporating individual rotations into your classroom with your students. So the next thing to consider is, how might I use this in my classrooms? What might this look like? So first, let's take a look at what it could look like schedule-wise. It could be that you give all of your students a choice board, pathway, or playlist, say on a Monday, and students work through their activities at their own pace, and you have a due date on a Friday. You can give it to them through your learning management system, and they can turn it back in when it's complete. So that's one way to handle that choice board, pathway, or playlist model. Another way that you might also consider is, as students are progressing through, you could have synchronous check-ins. So you might check in with students to see how they're doing throughout the week. Maybe you schedule a certain time period, maybe an hour at the beginning, where students can come into the meet and get feedback face-to-face if necessary. They can also collaborate with peers during these check-in times. Scheduling can be flexible, whatever works for you. So it may be that students are mostly working on their own, or maybe you schedule some time in this pathway or playlist to check in with students individually or in a group. Some things you should consider as you're creating them is, when might I check in with students? Do I need to check in with students? Or is this something that, like the example that we saw, you have everything that you need. This is just a review. Right now you're practicing asynchronously. So sometimes you might not need to check in with students, but sometimes you might. So if so, when might that occur? Also, with this concurrent situation where we have some students who are at school and some students who might be at home, what additional supports might students who are working from home need in order to complete these choice boards, pathways, or playlists? So thinking through some of those logistical things as you're creating these individual rotations. Might students who are working at home need additional directions? Might they need additional time to check in with you? Might they need a video explaining something or showing them how to do it? All of these pieces may come into play as we move into this concurrent style of teaching. So next we'll take a look at, what does planning look like for the use of individual rotations or these choice boards, pathways, and playlists. So the steps will sound very familiar as the components. So determine a list of activities or assessments that meet your learning objectives, and consider where you might give students feedback. So what do you already have? Are there things that are provided to you that you could use? The second step is to gather the digital resources that students will need and create those clear, either digital instructions in writing or in video. So sort of putting all of those pieces together, gathering what you have. So not only determining the standards and what students need to know and be able to do, but also creating how they're going to do those things. And then the next step is to decide if these activities need to happen in a specific order. Is it important for one activity to come before the next? And if so, then you may be looking at more of a pathway or a playlist where you have students complete things in a specific order. And with those, especially with pathways, there may be some check-ins along the way. As students complete things, you may need to check and see if they have done what they need to do to progress to the next step. And if it's not necessary, it might just be a choice board where they can choose whichever type of activity they'd like in whichever order they'd like. And then the last step is to organize activities into a format that makes sense and make sure all the links and everything the student needs are included for them. So the first step of listing your resources. So consider what you already have. So you have your live delivery, you have videos, you have text. Learning Central is full of information and your specific content is located there. So see what's already in Learning Central that you could use as a part of a choice board, pathway, or playlist. Remember, we're not like reinventing the wheel with what we're doing. We're just taking what we have and packaging it in a way that makes it more accessible for students who are with you and who are at home. So the second step is for you to gather those digital resources and instructions. So you may have to record some things for your students. And if so, you can use any of these tools here. So Screencastify, Screencast-O-Matic. Maybe you hop into a Google Meet by yourself and press record and explain it to students that way. Maybe you have a Flipgrid that explains what you need students to do in the Flipgrid. But this way they can sort of connect with you, they can see and hear your voice, and maybe there's some content that you need delivered this way. So you're sort of going back to that flipped instruction model that Katie talked about a few weeks ago. And then take a look at what existing resources you have. So we have access to Discovery Ed and NC WiseOwl that are located in the Wake ID portal. You might use videos from something like Khan Academy or Edpuzzle, or maybe you take a look at what's available in Blue Canvas or Student Canvas that students already have access to. So several courses have blueprint courses that are available there, and in the blueprint courses there are already activities that are available for students. So whether they're assessments or graphic organizers or other just information, maybe there are videos already there that you can access. So the third step is to plan the order of events. So do you need students to check in with you? So considering these things as you plan out is an important step because there may be a specific flow you need students to go in order to progress through the standard in a way that makes sense to them. And then the last step is to organize. So first off, we have our 2 learning management systems. So these resources or pathways or playlists could be shared through your learning management system. So maybe you're using Google Classroom or Canvas. They can also be housed in a single either Google Doc or slide or even a form or a Google Drawing. So with the document, you may have heard of HyperDocs before. This is an example that you could use with students as they go through. It gives the choice of one activity as well as the I can statement. The slide example we've already taken a look at with Dr. Sweat's slides. If you want students to progress through things in a certain order, maybe you use a Google form. So with the form, you could have them progress how they learn best. So maybe they learn best by writing, and you want them to go through a Google form and start their learning by making some choices. So this sort of helps direct students down those paths of making choices. Or maybe you organize it in a Google Drawing. So what I would recommend here is not using tools that are unfamiliar to students, but instead picking a couple tools that your students are good at using and then organizing them in one of these ways. And it could be It could be that you use all of these tools just in a different way for a different purpose. But there are examples here for you to click through and take a look at different ways that these could be formatted for students. And not only that, but you have to teach your students how to. So whether it be manage time. So sometimes when students are given a choice board, knowing where to start could be tricky. So if students know that it's due on Friday, some students may need to know that they need to do one activity every day in order to have the entire choice board completed by Friday. Maybe students need help with the navigation, so finding the pieces and the parts. Hopefully you've organized it in a way that makes sense for students, but they may need help navigating between what you've asked them to do. And then students may also need assistance making choices that best fit them. So I go back to the example of like using Google spreadsheets. I love that, but not everybody does. So some people may choose to represent their learning in different ways. So maybe they like to use a Jamboard, or they like to use Google Slides. They may make choices and they may need help guiding them in how they can make that choice. Some students, as you first start out, may even need some guidance as to what each of these choices might look like. So say that students have the option to create a cell. They could do this in a couple different ways, but maybe they need an example of what that cell might look like in the end. So I'm going to pause again and give you a minute to review and reflect what we've talked about today, and to complete the sentence to sum up what you've learned about individual rotations. So, I used to think, but now I know. So last, I'll leave you with some additional resources. So today we only went through one example of a choice board, but maybe you want to dive a little bit deeper into a pathway or a playlist, or read more about these. So I'm leaving you first off with your own type of choice board. So maybe you choose to read all of the articles. Maybe you choose to watch all of the videos or look at the examples. Depending on what additional learning you would like out of this choice board may be helpful for you to dive into different areas that we've talked about today. I'll also leave you with some individual rotation examples from the courses. So you saw the first 3 in the 4 courses that you took at the beginning of the year. And then the ones that are in pink were shared as examples of choice boards, pathways, or playlist from different people in the district. So they each have their own subject, their own spin, but those are examples shared from Wake County teachers. And on this page, there are some additional resources from Charlotte-Mecklenburg County of different choice boards, pathways, and playlists arranged by grade level. So feel free to dive into those as well. Sometimes it's easier to see it to help you get started to know what it could look like. And then last off, feel free to reach out to your DLC at dlc.wcpss.net if you would like further information on individual rotations. And last, we just ask that you submit your feedback with the feedback that is linked on this slide. So if you need help, again, go back to the WCPSS website and you'll find the slides there, as well as the link to the feedback form. And thank you for your time today.